afternoon. I'm Representative Dan Itse. I come from Fremont, New Hampshire, down in the flatland. I have with me
Suzanne Smith, State Rep for Plymouth, Hebron, and Holderness, Grafton County, District 8.
and
I'm Paul Ingbretson, and I'm Grafton County District 15.
now people talk about the usually 600 to 700 bills that we deal with coming out of the House every session, and people say, "Why do we need so many laws? Why are you making so many new laws?" Well, the truth is, most of what we do is not making new laws. Most of what we do is tweaking of old laws, or even eliminating them, because you can't get rid of an old law without a bill. And what we've done is go through the bills that have actually passed both houses of the legislature, the House of the Representatives and the House of the Senate. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we've done, and then maybe some of the things that our committees have done, because in addition to the bills that each of us submits or are party to during the legislative year, we sit on committees, and these committees will deal with a number of bills, and our most significant acts may not even be with our own bills, but with other people's bills. So, Suzanne, ladies before gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I serve on the Resources, Recreation, and Development Committee, and this year was a pretty light year for resources, but one of two or three of the bills we had tweak laws that are already in place. For instance, off-road vehicles, OHRVs as they're called, may now travel on state trails and Jericho Mountain State Park if they're up to 65 inches wide, northern Grafton County and Coos County only. But that was a change from 2 years ago when we increased it to 62 inches. So it's just these kind of little bills that don't seem very exciting, but you learn a lot about each issue that you vote on in your committee. That was
Right. Well, since you started that way, actually, if you don't mind, Representative, it's I'm on your committee this year.
Right.
Not
my committee. I don't chair it, but we're on the same committee, and
so
I've
that's
been there a
Child
while.
and Family Law.
Child and
correct?
Family Law, right. And I did that actually, I chose that actually because so many of the issues that we were hearing in the Redress Committee are related to the
Family.
issues that come around family, divorce in particular, child custody, alimony, and any number of those things. And I have to say that it was a pretty rewarding experience in the sense that a number of bills were easily brought forward, and ones that weren't brilliant bills were studied and improved and turned into bills that will improve the situation. So that was a new experience for me. I mean, typically I was in education before that, and we see a bill, we hate the bill, we trash the bill, you know. And we got so many bills, it's very difficult to work
Right.
on a bill when you have so many in a committee. I think they had 70 or something like that in education this year. So that was a pretty nice thing, and rewarding in the sense that we were clearly making progress in some of those areas where people are struggling in the family division of the court.
Well, it's interesting because other than the year that I was chairman of Constitutional Review, I've spent my other 12 years on children and family law, and then it'll be 2 more this term. And children and family law, unlike many of the other committees, that if the bill isn't right, it's toast. That committee has always, whether it was under Republican control or Democrat control, we have always worked on bills until we were satisfied that we could pass them nearly unanimously, vote them ITL because they were irredeemable, fairly unanimously, or we would work on them. And even this term, I think we had about 30 bills altogether, 25 or 30 bills, and we retained 6 of them to work on them, and then they will come back in the next session. And I think really came to excellent resolution on those bills that we've retained.
And I think all sides actually have found common ground.
That is usually the case in that committee, and that's one of the reasons I've enjoyed serving on that committee so much over the years is we worry them to death. And sometimes we don't agree, and then we go to the floor and we have our debate.
Well, that's what's nice about committee work is many of them are policy committees. They're not partisan issues. They're people who care about something like resources or agriculture or energy, and then the people work together, the members of the committee, not necessarily along partisan lines at all. I know when I was on Environment and Agriculture, we prided ourselves that many of the bills were passed unanimously, and in resources also, we have had almost all of our bills be on the consent calendar, which means they were voted nearly unanimously because we worked on them to make them work for everybody.
It would have your unanimous, your pleasure at the unanimity of those was sort of. I don't know if you were there the year John Bird. It was famously everybody on the committee but John Bird. So it'd be 19 to John
19
Bird.
to Bird.
19 to Bird. Yeah. So, but anyway, it is actually in this committee though. I mean, I think there's some fairly clear lines, but when you get right down to the issue and the fine points on the issue, you can eliminate some of the points that are really difficult and make progress.
Well, and it's
And
interesting
it's been
because
good.
this pile of bills we have before us have passed both the House and the Senate,
Right.
and many of them on the consent calendar, regardless of who introduced them, Republican,
Right.
Democrat, or both.
Right.
So,
Right, and often, one of the things that with all due respect, I'm from the Liberty side, and we tend to think, and it's not you, it's our own party, and sometimes the Democrat Party. We seem to think of ourselves as the guys who are resisting all this law, and it was nice to see any number of bills coming out of your party, and yours in particular. I think it was your bill that's actually liberalizing or improving a situation. Toward less control. And that
right,
sort of
well,
thing.
you're talking about House Bill 484, which relieves the burden on people who are disabled or the elderly who want to stay in their homes and cannot because they can't get a caregiver who is allowed to give them their medications.
Right.
And I'm not saying delegate the medications, but just put them in the person's hand so the person can put them in their mouth.
Yep.
And so when the House and the Senate passed it unanimously, House Bill 484, so that's going to be very beneficial. And for those who are mentally sound but physically unable to do things, such as it's not legal for a licensed nurse assistant to put someone's eye drops in for them right now.
Right.
And that's really crazy.
Well,
And there's another bill. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, well, it really is an interesting situation because I have a severely disabled son. He's quadriplegic and cannot speak. And fortunately for him, we are his guardians now. And of course, when he was a minor, we were his guardians. And we could do those, serve in that function for him. But if you have somebody who's an adult, you don't want to, have your parent declared legally incompetent just so that you can give them a medication. That's, it'd be denigrating to do
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
And just, to be able to have somebody hand them the medicine, or even if they have to put it in for them, but to be able to put it in at direction. Somebody says, I need eye drops, the LNA.
Right. The
Can put the
doctor or
drops.
the nurse has said, these are the eye drops you give the person. The LNA just then gives the eye drops.
Yep.
But it's the long-term care subcommittee realized that this was a huge problem, and so they introduced, they asked me to introduce the bill. It was,
Well
and
done.
I'm so glad it
Well done.
passed.
Well, yeah, it's always nice to get one in. I was talking to one rep from up in the North Country, and he was saying, 1 out of 10 would be a pretty good rate of passage. But there was also a bill, and I think you were referring to it, but it allows nurses at certain levels to also do things that they've not been allowed to do in the past. And I wanted to say things like doing some certain kinds of injections and something like that. I can't remember what it was. I wish I
Well,
had
there's
that one in front of me.
the glucagon for high school kids who are diabetic. Say, for instance, they're out on the sport field, they're
Right,
playing their
right,
sport,
right.
and they're type 1 diabetes, Senator Stiles introduced a bill to allow people to be other people other than the school nurse to be trained to give them the injection if they collapse on the field.
So, and that passed both houses?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's no fewer than
Yeah.
3 then. So it's always exciting to someone in my position who wants to see a whole lot less government. But and on that same subject, I was interested in on my side, if you don't mind me running off somewhere.
Go ahead.
But I have a whole stack here. I just brought it up with me, a whole stack of bills that are privacy-related bills or encourage, the sharing of information kinds of bills. And this House has been really pretty strong. I mean, thanks to the leadership of longtime Representative Kirk from Ware. Mm-hmm. But I want to say there are no fewer than 8 successfully passed, but I know for sure 5. And various kinds of them. One of them included the one that's been a source of some people leaving the school districts and going to homeschooling, and I am among them, by the way. Not to be pretend it's just it's a distant knowledge, but and that is the previous knowledge. Important to know exactly the content of stuff that's going to be questionable. It has been difficult to get the information. I remember at one point we went to a meeting in the school district where they were going to show the sex sex education materials, and then we got there. They said, no, we're just showing you the guidelines. We're not showing you the materials, and that doesn't help a parent if they actually don't want their child at age 7 or so exposed to certain things. So, and those are significant parental choices, and it was nice to see that a bill like that pass both houses. Of course, it doesn't just have to do with that issue, but others as well.
And just because it passed both houses doesn't mean everybody voted for it.
No, it doesn't mean everyone voted for it. It doesn't mean the governor's going to even sign it. I don't even remember whether the governor
Right.
said anything about that one. But of course not. Yeah.
That's actually, for those of you who are interested enough in politics to be watching this show, is just a little bit about how things pass the House. We've talked about consent and what it meant to be on, that the committee had supported either for or against a bill fairly unanimously. But when a bill is on consent, what we actually do is all the bills that are considered consent bills are the first vote of the day. Mm-hmm. And so we will, if they have made it onto consent because the committee was unanimous or nearly unanimous in their support of the recommendation, then we may have 10 to 30 bills on the consent calendar that we pass with one vote. However, anybody can pull any bill off of consent. Any representative can pull any bill off of consent. So it doesn't mean it's a done deal, but it's one of the ways that we get through our business more readily. Then we have a number of bills that will come up that just go to a voice vote. And those always end up going with whatever the committee recommendation was. Mm-hmm. And then we have the meat, which is where we actually enter into a debate and have recorded votes on bills. Mm-hmm. So that's just kind of the hierarchy. Now, what Representative Ingbretson didn't show you, and I think he's got another stack over there. I mean, we have about
Oh, okay.
I don't know, 25
bills here.
probably here that I would expect. And what we're not showing you is the other stacks of bills that we have here.
This is altogether is not even half of what we actually passed this year.
Right.
These are the bills that have passed both the House and the Senate already. So is there anything here that you? Well, we're in the North Country or close to it, and there are some bills up here. Representative Rideout from Coos County. He got a bill through that allows maple syrup trucks to travel on the secondary roads that have weight limitations. And they only make 2 or 3 trips a year like that. They're the same roads that oil trucks are allowed to travel in the winter as well. And this was actually a significant inhibition on the maple syrup industry here in the North Country.
Oddly enough, but one of the difficulties is actually when you're up in the North Country, you don't have the votes. It's different. Sometimes, Manchester and all those other places where all the representatives are, where the population is. Sometimes it's difficult to move North Country bills, and he must have done some good homework in that one.
And it's definitely supported bipartisan people from the North Country.
Sure.
Just for the record,
Representatives from the North Country.
Representatives Rideout, Richardson, Patton from Merrimack
Okay.
Outer,
Yeah.
Representative Thal, Representative
Lancaster.
Massimilla from Grafton, and Representative TheBurge from Coos.
Right.
And so that's both parties and predominantly the North Country, but it got through.
Another one that has people from the North Country and then people involved with agriculture. An act to allow homestead food operations be exempt from licensure. Now, we passed this law 4 years ago so that small farmers selling less than $20,000 worth of jams, jellies, mustards, things that are not no meat, I should
Right.
say,
Yeah. Dangerous,
from their home or at farmers markets. And this year, it was amended to allow these folks to also sell at retail food stores. So when I'm here in Plymouth and I'm making jam and jelly, I can sell it at Peppercorn as well as going to the farmer's market.
It's a
Peppercorn's
great
the natural
idea,
food store.
the idea of a site in a store like that, isn't it? To where the locals actually have. We have chocolate
Yeah.
makers
Right.
up in our country that they go to the fair and they may have a booth somewhere else, but
Yeah.
it's been more
I
restricted.
mean, if you're a big business, if you're making $50,000 worth of product a year, then you are not eligible for this, and you do have to go through licensure, getting your kitchen licensed. But these, you don't have to have a kitchen license even. But you do have to state on the label that it was made in an unlicensed kitchen, and your name has to be on it, which is,
Yeah,
and then the buyer
good
decides.
stuff.
Right.
Yeah, good stuff.
Buyer beware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just I think it's fascinating just for those of you who are sitting at home. Okay, this is a piece of legislation, had to be drafted, had to be put into the right sections of law, and what we did was actually add 8 words, 4 words to each of 2 sections of law, and that's a bill.
Right.
I mean, so you can see how much to do there is about a very small
Right.
change in law, or
But each bill has to have a public hearing, and
Yeah,
the public can come
yeah.
and testify for or against it.
and in New Hampshire that's very easy as opposed
It
to
is.
other states.
Correct.
Anybody can come in and testify on a bill.
Typically, bills like this have 2 witnesses, and they're fast.
I don't know.
Well,
I
typically,
bet they
no,
had a
when
full
you're
house.
changing the apostrophe.
Homestead, yeah.
Oh, no, that one, no, I agree. That one undoubtedly was.
Yeah.
No. But when they're changing the 2 words, that's 4 words. I'm sorry. I was looking at other ones. This stack I didn't bring. One of them said the RSA number is wrong. So the dark part that's replacing the previous part, it says RSA 283 instead of RSA 292. It's a correction found by, I think, somebody at the department.
Right.
So lots of those bills are like
Where's
that.
the rest of that
By the way,
bill?
one thing I ran into that really, I actually have heard, I know that we are the most licensed state in the nation, I believe. Is that not so?
Pretty close to-
We're one of the very top. And one of the things as I was going through all the bills we successfully passed, I was amazed at how many licenses, and that I'd never even heard of. I'm sorry I can't tell you the names of them, but, well, like what you just mentioned, the kitchen license of some sort, I forget what that was, but I was just surprised at the names of them all. I mean, somebody must have brought it forward at some point, but it was licensing of things that I was just surprised to hear. Food stuff, things like that, where you're looking to have some a priori review before people get stuff out there in the market and that sort of thing, I understand, but we're
It's like
doing so many things.
balancing the freedom with
Yeah.
public safety.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, which of course that's that original statement of the founders, right? It's if you hold security more dear than your liberty, you'll probably lose some. But at any rate,
Here's 2 interesting bills. Not sure what committee they went to, but expanding the use of medical marijuana, therapeutic cannabis. This one is a 1-page bill, and it adds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conditions.
health
that-
conditions.
Health conditions
Yeah.
that are eligible. My wife has lupus.
And notice the reps on that one. I believe I believe that's also a mixed body.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's some things that
Yeah.
are just so self-evident, and it's not a party issue in this slightly, when it comes to people's health. And there were, I think, 4 or 5 more cannabis-related ones came out of the Senate. They were somewhat similar, just marginal things.
Right.
But cannabis and health.
Did we pass medical marijuana 2 years ago or 4 years ago?
I want
I
to say
think it was
4.
4.
it
So
was that
whenever
long
you
ago.
pass a huge sweeping piece
yeah,
of
absolutely.
legislation like medical marijuana, then the next few years you're
You
going to
tweak
have
and tweak.
a lot of
Yeah, why not
tweaks.
me? What happened to my part? Yeah.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
happened to my,
Yeah.
my condition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this one is a bill that simply enables it to cannabis, therapeutic cannabis, to be available at the veterans' homes.
And that was brought in by one of our veterans on our side. I don't know if it was one person or was it several?
No, several people.
Okay.
But it
Was that
included.
Baldessaro or was that somebody
Well,
else?
he's a.
Oh, he's just a co-sponsor. I thought
And
Co-sponsor.
actually Representative Moffett, who's
Yeah.
Democrat.
Right.
Right, so perfect.
So
yeah.
it's definitely
Representative
bipartisan.
Nodder. I mean, and
Yeah, and
these
Nodder's
are
very
actually
conservative, yeah.
so is Baldessaro. I mean, you have both ends of the spectrum. But when something's a good
But it
idea,
does take some common ground to pass bills in the first place. We do know that.
Yeah, yeah.
it
That's what you're
requires
actually saying.
generally. Well, it takes about 180 people on any given day. We have a 400-member house, and typically on any given day we have about 360 in attendance.
Correct.
That's pretty average. That's 90%, and it shifts around. It's not always the same people present, generally. So that means that you really have to get more than 180 votes typically to pass a bill. And you see most stuff pass with at least 185, 187 votes. And seldom do you see more than 220.
Well,
that would
right.
be
We
unless
rarely
you
had 300 on anything.
Right.
That's a 2 or 3 times a year kind
Yeah.
of thing. Maybe a half a dozen. The 2 exceptions, of course, are depending on whose house it is, you typically break apart completely on the budget because there's so much stuff in the budget.
On the other hand, we had 3 weeks ago maybe a bill that passed with only 2 or 3 dissenting votes.
Correct. I don't remember which.
And it was
the
a roll
capital
call.
budget
It was a roll
we
call.
passed pretty
were-
almost unanimously.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the roll call part was for. Everybody wanted to raise their hand.
Somebody had a bee in their bonnet about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I was saying, though, the budgets are difficult. They typically are a party line because of there's so much complexity in them, and so much of it goes in the direction of the tendencies of this party versus that, and it's money control. So
Although 2 years ago, the budget
Yeah.
passed by
Did you
a
have a
strong,
comment?
Oh,
strong
yeah.
margin.
oh, of course, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I wasn't there, and I
Yeah.
apologize for that. Yeah, right. Not for it happening.
Well, yeah, no, it was worked out by the Democrat-controlled House
And the
Right.
Republican-controlled Senate.
and Republican-controlled Senate, and it was not substantially different than the prior budget. So
Now, we've been maintaining good budgets in terms of the numbers, but then there are a lot of at each time when your party's not in control, you get up there and you're protesting over this or that, trying to change little things. You're trying to do it, and it's hard to do. And sometimes you lose a lot of votes, sometimes you don't, over the overall budget.
What the viewers probably don't know is the process that's going on right now
Right.
is the House passed a budget. Now the Senate and the House passed a budget that began with the governor's proposed budget, and then the House passed a budget. Now it's in the hands of the Senate, and every day, the way the wind blows affects what is going to happen with the budget, and then the House and the Senate will meet in committee of conference. 3 senators and 3 House reps, or actually with finance, I think it may be more. And then they
yeah.
have to iron out their differences. And it's kind of like no one leaves here alive kind of thing. I mean, they have to be unanimous.
Settle it. That's right. Yeah.
nobody leaves happy.
No one leaves happy, but it has to be unanimous by whoever is
Yes.
from the Senate
And
and
the
the
guy
House.
who's thrown out is the least happy.
Yeah.
Or maybe the most happy.
But that's going
That's
to be a
interesting
challenge.
stuff. Yeah.
One of the big issues up here is energy, because we have the Northern Pass project proposed and the wind farms along Newfound Lake. And one of the bills I introduced was House Bill 626, which has been retained. And the reason it was retained is because it just we want everyone to be on board. We don't want it to be partisan. We don't want it to be utilities versus legislators. And it sets up energy infrastructure corridors in the state. And right now, the Department of Transportation has said we have full authority to have these corridors along the interstate highways and Route 101 between Manchester and the coast. And so an applicant for an energy project, a big energy project, could apply to the state to use the corridor. And the lines along the corridors would have to be buried because Department of Transportation, the federal government require that. And no one has to apply to use these, but for example, Northern Pass, who is getting a lot of flack from people who live in smaller right-of-ways and do not want these, it would be an easy thing for someone to use this corridor and maybe save a lot of money on all the diplomatic things they're having to do now to try to win hearts and minds.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm in the energy industry, and I went to a conference a number of years ago on superconductors of all things, and that was one of their real stated advantages is the amount of power that you could carry down the center of an interstate highway. And they were talking particularly in congested areas like Route 90, the Mass Turnpike. But you could actually put a substantial conductor down the center of that. But it's an idea. I'm surprised it wasn't capitalized on earlier, because I knew that was possible. That's an area that's actually already been ceded, at least in part, to federal control.
Correct.
And it's landscape that is already disrupted.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to be complaining about the view change.
Correct.
And it's something that makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, one of the things back in after the Keller decision down in Connecticut, Representative Gaida introduced an amendment to our Constitution, which said that you couldn't use eminent domain to transfer property from one private party to another private property. And when the whole Northern Pass issue opened up 4 years ago,
at least 4 years ago. I think it was 6 years ago that we had the eminent domain bill.
2011, 2012
Yeah.
is when it was. And one of the things that I was asked to sit in because of constitutional issues on science, technology, and energy. And the other Representative Gaida, Representative Bob Gaida's brother, then sitting in the legislature, from an entirely different area of the state, we worked on it and made it so that the same types of restrictions that apply to power plant siting applied to transmission line siting, which really put that article of the Constitution into operation relative to power lines. And so with all that has been going on in Northern Pass issues, none of that land can be taken by eminent domain anymore.
Right.
And that's important for the people to know that they're not under that threat. And with that change, the ability of those who want to transmit power and other public utilities, natural gas coming down from Canada, etc., the opportunity to use those highway corridors is extremely important.
And the developer would be paying lease agreement money to the state, bringing us a little bit of income, which would be very nice.
What was the central point of your bill?
Was setting up, I mean, it's already been stated, there was a Senate committee a few years ago, I want to say the Senate Bill 361 committee, who designated said, yes, these corridors will work. This bill goes into the depth of how to do it.
Okay.
How the leasehold agreements would be put together, who would be the applicant would apply to, which department, PUC, Department of Transportation, the SEC, and that's the nuts and bolts that we're working on now and will be working on as the bill is reaching.
Now, does that come in as highway money?
Because the federal government has control, it goes into the Department of Transportation to be used for projects that have a federal component.
Okay.
And there are many.
Yes.
So-
Widening 93 down in
Yeah,
Salem,
yeah.
for example.
So your bill doesn't directly affect Northern Pass?
No.
It's just,
It's
the other
trying to
part,
be
it's the other part of this
proactive.
conversation.
Yeah,
no,
it's
that's
trying
good.
to be proactive
Yeah.
for Northern Pass or for anyone in
Yeah,
the
I was
future.
gonna say,
Absolutely.
yes,
No,
yes,
no.
it does, in fact, directly impact Northern Pass, because Northern Pass, as it sits right now, is probably impassable. Because getting enough property holders to sell their land at a price that PSNH, or now EverSource, can afford in a contiguous line to bring that power transmission in is probably pretty near impossible.
It seems to me, so.
Unfortunately, the right of ways that we have total control over, so to speak, are the interstates, and north of the notch,
Huh.
the
So
interstate
also-
goes into Vermont.
Yes.
So there's also a component in the bill to set up how to figure out how do you get Route 3 or 101 West,
Yep.
any of those highways
Right.
that could be
Because you
used as
might
energy
want
corridors.
to, if they came down, say 91 in Vermont, you
And
might want to
cross
come.
into-
You might want to come across
At
101
Monroe.
West.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Does it
There's
affect
many
the corridors?
options.
There are already corridors there. The town the edge of Haverhill has a
That's the
bar of
national.
them going through.
Well, that's interesting because
Yeah.
it comes through Hebron too. It comes through my
Right,
town
right.
also. It comes all. I pass it when I drive down from Haverhill.
Right.
It's like in and out, and that is National Grid. And so even
Okay.
though I believe there is room in that corridor to put more energy from Hydro-Quebec,
Right.
because that does come from Hydro-Quebec, it's not EverSource, so they don't want to pay the rent to National Grid. That's my thought. I don't know that for a fact, but they're two different companies and they compete,
Right.
so.
But it being that kind of a grid, though, that is part of that study. Then, that's what I'm getting.
No,
at.
because that's privately owned by National Grid.
Okay, I didn't
Yeah,
register that.
it
Okay.
They
has to
already
be
bought the
public,
land.
state-owned,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
I mean, EverSource could pay them
Right.
to add another
Right,
line to
right,
their poles.
Right.
Which is no different than AT&T using Verizon towers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
People have to
Yeah.
work together better on that.
Well, you can make
It's
protect
been
the
interesting,
state.
though. It's been interesting.
you,
though.
you can make your
Yeah.
money by selling by putting up transmission lines, or selling the space to put up transmission lines.
Right. I was just looking to see. There's a silly stack of bills. I was just looking to see if there's something I was actually overlooking, but I think that's it.
Well, here, you want to look at this one?
Which one?
This
is that?
that's one you wanted to look at.
Oh well, yeah. It's one of those things, So many. I've been involved a number of times with people who are having laws applied to them, and it seems like they go on and on and on and on. By the time it's been 15 years or something, or you're trying to figure out what was the proper punishment for that. This is in one case it was a DUI. And it turns out the guy had failed to do a particular thing way back, like 6 years before. Therefore, he had to go through this whole process all over again. And it was because somebody didn't tell him about it. And I actually passed a bill a couple of years ago that enabled the department head, the commissioner, to actually look at those and make a decision because of mistakes made in the But the tightness that we want around DUI, for example, we'll do a similar thing with felonies. I think they're misdemeanors related to. I think they're just misdemeanors at that level when they're related to
I think
sexual.
it was a high misdemeanor.
Yeah.
That's called.
Yeah, and and so all this bill did, and I haven't actually ascertained that it belongs in this class, but there's a young man who, when he and a little girl were both juveniles, allegedly did something, and he's well past that point of even the 5 years when he should have a right to be reviewed and all that sort of thing. He's having a really difficult time with it. And so this looks like it's one of those things, and I suggest that the better part of justice is mercy. Somebody said that once, and it's one of those bills. I look forward to seeing if this actually will work for my guy. I don't know how many people are dealing with this. I'm certainly not interested in seeing child molesters or anything like that on this.
Right.
Not being noted and that sort of thing, given the history of that they often carry with them, of repeats and that sort of thing. But that was just one bill where you go from having a 5 years before you can be reviewed to having only 3 years. in the more minor cases. where you
Yeah,
want to
I'm
review.
not quite sure of that bill, but it sounds like it would be something if you have an 18-year-old dating a 16-year-old and then he's arrested for statutory rape when
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
they were almost the same age kind
Right.
of thing.
It isn't that the situation up there is in that class, and I have a suspicion, although I haven't talked to the sponsors
Yeah,
of this bill and
yeah.
asked them.
Yeah.
But I'm
I
also
know.
betting, because I didn't see it before going through
Yeah.
this pile. I wasn't aware of it on the floor, so it might have been a consent.
It might have
calendar
been.
bill.
Well,
Yeah.
and I would also point out that it is, again, I believe, well, it is definitely a bipartisan bill.
Yeah, David Welch, Suzanne Harvey, and
Right.
Suzanne
And it's the-
Harvey's
and
a
it's-
big one on human rights.
Well,
And it's the Criminal Justice Committee.
And Rennie
right,
Cushing.
Rennie Cushing,
Right.
Representative Cushing from Hampton, I think.
Hampton, yeah.
And
Senator Reagan from
Representative
Deerfield.
Birch. Okay, so we have, again,
It's a cross-section.
Yeah.
a great
Some
cross-section.
self-evident need to, and in this case, to bring a little mercy to certain cases. Yeah. Representative Itse, you actually, I think, had like 3 different bills passed this year.
Oh,
You're not
I-
bragging about any of that stuff. I think
Well,
I think you're going to maybe pass as many as 8 or 9.
I think in the
This
end,
is a co-sponsors as well as sponsor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Dan is one of the most notorious of bill bringers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean notorious, meaning just by sheer numbers.
Yes.
Which some of us get very upset about. Not me in particular, but it does create a significant burden. On the other hand, some of the issues are complex. So when you're child and family, they're like you need 5 bills to solve one problem.
Right.
So I understand the possibility that that's
well, and the other thing that happens is you have a bill that gets rejected on technicality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the next term, you want to bring it back, addressing that technicality. And having been there 14 years, or 14 years thus far, 15 maybe, and you get a certain number that are going through getting adjusted from last term's complaints. But this is actually one that's rather interesting. It's the second time I've had it in. It actually passed both the House and the Senate 4 years ago. I brought it back again this year. It's something that is actually of interest to both parties. Both parties have certain issues that they want to see addressed in an Article 5 convention.
Citizens United.
Citizens United, which actually both Representative Ingbretson and I, though we may not agree with the way it's being addressed, we both are in agreement with the Democrat position, which is that incorporated businesses or entities are not people. They don't have natural rights, and that's. I mean, to me,
That's where
Nice
that's
to
coming
know.
from. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I don't really like the proposed amendment, but this bill is limiting the authority of delegates to Article 5 conventions, and it's really important that if there is ever going to be such a thing, that it's only going to happen because the legislatures of the states feel comfortable that they can direct what their delegates to that convention are going to address. That it's not going
Control
to be
the outcome.
not control the outcome, but it can't be a runaway convention.
And that is a concern of a lot of people.
That's a concern of a lot of people, and that is exactly what this bill does. And I put it in just actually only addressing the authority of the delegates. That we, the legislature, whenever this convention would maybe somehow occur, we would then tell our delegates what subjects they were allowed to address. And then it was amended by the House committee to add also how our delegates would be selected, so that we don't give Congress the opportunity to muck with what is essentially a state power. If we are going to have a convention of the states, we aren't going to allow Congress to determine
Right,
how
'cause
our
they're
delegates
federal.
are elected, because it's a convention of the states. And so it's really forward-looking. It's the only bill of this kind that actually has a specification on how delegates are elected and how many delegates.
And this passed both houses.
This passed both houses and is waiting for the governor's action.
That was one of those in the House, if I remember right, that had a pretty decidedly high number, this one here.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised that the sort of the limited discussion even, it was on the floor, if I remember right, it came up.
Well, it's interesting because the public will call me up and they'll say, well, how did you vote on House Bill, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, what bill are we talking about? Or,
Give me a title.
Right, yeah. Give me
I know.
a title. And, when I say, well, gee, I don't remember voting on it, it's because in any one day you vote on 50 to
absolutely.
100 bills, sometimes with the consent calendar
Yeah.
included. Maybe not 50 to 100, but
Well,
30 easily.
30
Yeah.
easily, and probably only a handful that you actually have debate on that makes it fuse in your memory of what
Correct.
you did.
Yeah.
Right. That is the issue, isn't it?
It is.
Bang, bang, bang. They're going by in front of you. Well, I found that when I first came in that reading all the bills, which I haven't done since, but I did in those first 2 terms, I found that actually got them into your head once. Then whatever committee you were in, you got them into your head again. And there are various ways in which you might hear from them 3 times.
Right.
And I did remember bills much better then. But it's true that there's a bunch of bills you actually know aren't going anywhere. Why am I reading this bill? And you'll go through them.
Correct.
In those days, what was that? Dan, it seems to me there were like 1,200 bills that first year.
No, it's
Wasn't
never
it a crazy number like
no,
that? Or was that the total?
No, it's never actually that much because back.
I said first term. I shouldn't, not first year,
But I actually went back and looked back in 2011, I think,
right.
when and it doesn't vary a whole lot. It's typically the House introduces between 650 and a little over 700 bills, and the number doesn't vary much at all. Then the Senate will introduce another 350 to 400.
Yeah.
And
Well, that may be the total people are talking about then.
Yeah.
So it-
1,200 bills or something.
Or then also, initially, when people just do the legislative LSRs,
Yeah.
there are more, and then a lot of those fall by the wayside because you realize, my best friend is introducing the same bill, we'll just combine.
it's still not a whole lot. I don't think we remove 100 bills, 100 LSRs. I don't think it's that high. And like I said, I looked at it because at that time we were in control of the legislature and we were getting accused of this grand number of bills. So I said, okay, what is the number?
Right.
And I went back and looked, and it is not nearly as much as people believe it is, and it doesn't vary a whole lot.
People in the House, probably people outside don't even think about it. But this was 662, and I think I had a bill at 700 something. We were over 700 this year.
Right,
But it wasn't a number that shocked me. I thought I'd seen higher numbers before in
Oh,
the first
yeah.
year.
And we got through them pretty quickly, too.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
So there's a couple more bills locally that we had in our committee, in the Resources Committee, because I know we're running out of time here, if you don't live near a lake, you probably don't think about, is the aquatic invasive species. And we expanded the scope of the exotic aquatic species, plants and species committee to include and work more strongly with animals, because we have Asian clams, zebra mussels, some kind of flea, spiny flea,
Yeah, there's a frog.
that are starting to invade. So that committee's going to be working more. That's a statutory committee, not a House committee. They're going to be working more on that because that passed the House and the Senate. And
Was that a commission, or that's just to expand a commission? Is that what that
It's-
was, or
no, it-
reframing what they do?
It changes the scope, expands the scope of the committee.
Right.
So, and I got appointed to the committee, and then I, by default, became chair too. So,
There you go.
And that's
Lucky you.
so I have a lot of work on my
That's
plate
an
now with that.
interesting point, because you hear committees and commissions and things like that, and there is actually a rather fine but substantial difference between the two. Committees, when you hear committees on various subjects that live beyond a particular legislature, they are comprised only of legislators. And when you hear of commissions, they can include legislators and non-legislators.
Correct.
And that's, so for you at home, that's just, when you see one or the other. I just want to bring up, as we're closing it, something you don't see so often. We have House Bill 147, an act relative to the homestead exemption amount. It increased the homestead exemption from 100,000 to 120,000, introduced by a single rep, no co-sponsors, and yet it was so obvious that it's passed both chambers of the legislature. And I just kudos to Representative Tucker, but it's just funny to see something with one legislator pass both chambers.
May I add one before we, I don't know how well, we have 2 seconds left, but I do one thing. I actually brought this because I actually wanted to warn people who may not know about the wide berth laws. You know,
Oh, yes.
when you're driving in emergency
Correct.
vehicles, I recommend you really do pass now. We just passed a bill that says $100 is the fine, and I don't have the law in front of me, but you may want to look and see what wide berth laws actually look like.
Actually, you do have the law.
I
in front
know
Oh, is
that
it in
if
there?
you,
Is it
yeah,
actually
if
there?
you're,
Yeah.
if you're on the highway and there's an emergency vehicle pulled over and their lights are flashing, you have to go into the other lane, or
Right.
if you can't because it's too congested, you have
You
to
slow
slow way down.
Yeah. Well, there's a slowdown already built in. I don't know if it's there, but 55
Yeah.
when you see things like that, and
Right.
then the move over is at what was relatively new
Yeah,
the last
wide
few years.
berth.
The wide berth, yeah. And so I just wanted our constituents, anybody seeing this,
Yes.
to be aware. Let's save you
Pay
$100
attention.
here, but also for the safety of
The
those
first
people working
offense
on
is
the highway.
$100, and the second within a 12-month period is $200. And that's kind of an interesting aside. There was a time when all of our laws were published in the newspapers. Every new law was published in the newspapers. Within the last
Read
30,
That would
newspapers.
cost you a little bit, wouldn't it?
within the last, but it was a way of informing the public of
Right.
new laws. Within the in the latter half of the 20th century, I'm not sure particularly when, we ended that practice, which means there's a lot of stuff that can be happening that actually does affect you that you
Right.
don't
You
know
may
about.
not
Might
know
not
about.
know about. Well, this has been very interesting,
Thank you, Dan, for driving all the way up here and being
being a moderator
our moderator.
for our two Grafton
With your
County people.
seniority. Yeah.